오늘 지금 Fireside chat을 준비하고 있는데요.
That's why we have prepared a fireside chat. So Mr. Hoffman and Ms. Jennifer Zhu Scott, who made a keynote speech in the morning, I'd like to invite the two keynote speakers to the podium for a fireside chat. May I invite the two keynote speakers, please? Please be seated. Since this is a fireside chat, so we can casually start the conversation. For active discussion, I'd like to speak in English with our speakers, and you can tune to channel number 2 for Korean interpretation.
After the conversations, I'm not going to torture you guys with the kind of challenging questions, so don't be worried. Okay, so basically we can start with questions to both. Well, actually today, both of you guys emphasize the fact that the world is moving and evolving, changing, not just fast, rather than it's really exponential, growth rate, right? So, but I mean, we've also witnessed for last decades a lot of corporates and organizations actually, they fail to, follow up, catch up with this kind of speed because, for example, maybe they underestimate those kind of exponentials. Like, for example, in the 1980s, most of management consulting firms, they predicted that we will have just 900,000 mobile phone subscribers in 2000 in the US, but actual number was kind of 100 million, right? But also, I think it is very important for us to not to overestimate the exponentials. For example, a lot of mobility experts, they said, okay, we will have the robot taxis or fully automated cars on the road by 2020, but actually the actual number was 0, right? So given this kind of complexity of the prediction and everything, but how can we really, make ourselves really ready? How can actually organizations, corporates to be ready and prepare and innovate proactively to be able to catch up all this with all this speed and the exponential technology, and particularly what kind of skills should we actually cultivate at organization to especially convert our organization into data-driven organizations, just like what you said, and also to be react to the 5 forces. Maybe one of you can start, perhaps Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Great question. I was applied mathematics graduate, so I'm a mathematician by training. I think the word exponential is being overused. People throw this word around a lot. What does exponential mean? Is every same period of the growth is double the last same period in terms of units, right? So let's say if you have a football size of stadium as a swimming pool, and each minute you have one drop of water dripping into that stadium size of swimming pool. How long, if it's exponential, how long do you think that football-sized stadium will be filled? Any guess? Just to share a little bit exponential. What does exponential actually mean? How long do you think?
20 minutes.
20 minutes. Any other guess? I used to hear a lot of answers like, take days or, take a long time, but the right answer actually close to 43 minutes. So basically what it means is that, a couple minutes before the stadium get full, you actually see, it started to grow. But by the last few minutes, and suddenly you've been completely overflooded, right? And I think that's the sense a lot of corporates feeling today. But you're right. I do think, not everything is really growing exponentially. It's a little bit exaggerating. However, it's not to deny the speed of change we are facing today. I think in this kind of environment, the most important ability is to learn and then unlearn. You constantly have to learn, obviously we all understand that, and adapt into new kind of environment. But at the same time, you have to unlearn. That's much harder than learning because many of our assumptions every day has been challenged. And the very fundamental questions being challenged. I work with, because we deal with a lot of large families, and usually large families, they through over several generations accumulated wealth, their business usually is quite traditional. And whenever I talk to those families, and I always encourage them, don't assume you are selling clothes. Don't assume you are selling cars. You actually have to think about what kind of service you are delivering, right? Maybe when you're selling cars, you are actually a mobility company, and you have to think about what other services and products you can provide to satisfy that problem as well. So coming back to what I mentioned this morning is really focus on the problem you try to solve instead of the solution you understand or the device you are familiar with. So learning and unlearning.
And Stephen, yeah.
Oh, sure. So I think everything you said is absolutely right. Organizations and individuals, most importantly, need to be flexible. So we can't be locked in to our past assumptions. So as a person, the best thing you could be doing is questioning what you believe all the time. Because everything we think we believe today, a lot of it is already outdated. Like, we just don't know it. Like, most of us don't realize it yet. But those things we thought were true are no longer true. And that will definitely be true of the future. The other thing is to learn to understand where the world is now through designing experiments. Because we can't really know what's going to work in the future until we test it. So we always have, when we question our assumptions, we can't just question them. We actually have to test them. So really, the really smart individuals in corporations, in their lives, are always going out there and saying, let me try this again. And let me try this with the latest technology, with what I've learned, constant learning, as you said. Constant learning. Let me try this again and see how it really works. And then they're taking that in a feedback loop and iteratively, continually doing that and improving themselves.
Right. So basically, what I understood from here is that rather than, equipping, us with technical skills, rather we should be more flexible and agile, and so that we can actually do, keep testing and again, so that actually we can shape the future rather than really predicting what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, and this is true because a lot of, people thought in Silicon Valley that, people are hopping jobs like crazy. Now, it used to be you stayed at a job for 20 years, in Korea too, right? And now people are moving around jobs every few years. Sometimes they only last 1 year. That's actually been a benefit. Because every time a new person comes to a new job, first of all, they're bringing with them all the experience from the other job, which may be very different from the company they're going to. And then in the new company, they're being challenged. There's somebody there who's saying, no, we do it differently. We do this. And that exchange of knowledge and that breaking down of barriers of what we thought would be true has increased innovation. And we'll see that continue.
Right. Great. Thank you very much for your answers. All right, so let's move to a second question, perhaps to Jennifer. So you also mentioned the importance of the data, especially also data literacy for organizations today. Of course, actually, so Steve's 5 forces, so all these areas need a really huge amount of data we know, right? So how much data we have is sometimes really, really key for our growth of our business. But I also think, the big tech companies let it kind of dominate the data market, and also it definitely would be much easier for them to come up with a really great innovative idea by making the best use of those data, while startups and SMEs are always like disadvantaged and struggling to collect and access the data. So is there any idea from your side on how we can actually build a more really balanced data ecosystem where we can see diverse innovation from diverse players, regardless of their size and their power influence? Is there any idea or thoughts from your side, please?
Thank you. This is a question really close to my heart because I think what we have seen the past 15, 20 years, some of the really, really large companies being established. And then today, roughly about 90% of the data actually generate from individual. And yet, the number of companies control those data, I can count with one hand. And it's basically between those very large companies between the US and China. And this is very unhealthy. It's not only unhealthy, as I mentioned, to the society and the individual, but you also brought up a very important question, which is for smaller companies, when you don't have a mean to generate as much data, how can you be competitive to large companies, better understand your consumers and better understand the market and have the speed to react as well. So this is one of the reasons I think it's really important to start to look into this new, very profound inequality in terms of data ownership. Right now, we have less than maybe 5, 6 global data overlords versus the rest of the world. I grew up in China when I was a kid. We, in our society system, very much focus on equality and at the expenses of liberty, right? So everybody's equal, but nobody has really, income, or, we all have the job, but you actually don't really own anything. Similarly, today, in the data economy, I see the parallel between the communism economic system where the states control everything and people own nothing and control nothing. Very similar today, with the big tech owns everything and smaller companies, individuals don't own anything. So where do we start? I think Web3, as I mentioned, provides some promises in terms of encourage models start to appear that really enable individuals to take back some control and take back some data. And in my spare time, in the past 2 years, I stepped up as executive chairman for the Commons Project, which is tech nonprofit. And one thing we did is during COVID, of course, all the countries shut down the border and people have to get COVID testing and a vaccine to show that you can travel. And that's very critical health data. So what we did is we started to set data standard called Smart Health Card. We work with Microsoft. We work with the big tech and actually deliver something that's much more democratized. So we established this new data standard called Smart Health Card for vaccine data, and now has been adopted by Japan, Canada, multiple states in the US, hundreds of healthcare providers, Salesforce, etc. But more importantly, for the first time, because we're nonprofit and neutral, so Apple with iOS 15 and above, and Google with Google Pay. So Android and iOS actually adopted something. So when we start to have this data interoperability that transcend geopolitics and transcend this operation system, we start to see more accessible type of data economy. And then from there, if we start to enable and empower individuals to carry your vaccine data with you, the next thing will be your other health data with you. And I think it's the right time that to build a structure, build a digital economy that actually empower the people instead of empower the handful of few companies. But as a smaller company, to answer your question, how do you start to compete? I think understand where you can gather meaningful data. Data is not, really counting on the amount of data, right? It's the quality of the data, relevance of the data. So you don't have to compete with the size. You compete with the relevance, and you compete with the speed, and really very systematically understand your company as a data company, make change, create this culture, as I mentioned in my talk this morning, to really quantify as many aspects as possible with your organization. And from there, you become more future-proof, right? But also, I think right now, the entire world has started to realize this digital inequality between data ownership. You have a chance to create a model that empower your customers to actually earn something, own something from the data they created with you. And from that's the incentive large tech companies not willing to share. So that's your opportunity to really create an ecosystem that actually enable a smaller company. I'm very hopeful that will happen.
Right. So given what you said, I also was thinking that would be also important for us to incentivize the big tech companies to share data which they collected from us, especially for public goods, so that actually we can make the most use of the data. What do you think, right?
Encourage. I don't think they are there to be encouraged. If they wanted to share, if they're willing to share, they had the chance 10 years ago.
Right.
However, having said that, I do think that the power is actually with consumer. Right? If consumers start to say, this is really important for me, I don't want to give you my data for free anymore, there's power in that. That's why in the past few years, Apple keep talking about privacy. Right? They realize that this is actually a competitive advantage if they talk about privacy. And one of the reasons why Facebook now is not cool anymore, a lot of people don't want to use Facebook, because they really struggle to pivot to really focus on consumers' well-being. So for younger, smaller companies, I really think this is the chance.
Right. Yeah. Maybe I can extend this question to Stephen as well, because also you are working with a lot of startups, perhaps have the similar challenges, difficulties, and maybe you got some kind of interesting examples and stories, right?
Yes. So with startups out there, there's a challenge because what we have are data monopolies. So these big companies, basically the power they have is when you're a monopoly, you're in a great position. So you have a monopoly, you own the data, nobody can do what you're doing. Every company out there in Silicon Valley wants a data monopoly. I don't care if they're a startup or they're Facebook, they all want to do this because it's the best possible business model. But as you pointed out, there are a lot of dangers to this, right? We've seen Cambridge Analytica, data used very irresponsibly. People aren't are participating in the use of their data. They're not being able to make the decisions. The hard part, and this is the challenge, is that most people out there are pretty ignorant of how their data is being used, and if you ask them, they don't even care. So a few people, like us, we're kind of on the cutting edge of tech. We understand the ramifications of this. Most people don't, and they don't care. And if you ask them, would you rather give your data or pay a fee, the majority would say, I'd rather give away my data. Like I don't want the money, just make it free for me. And that is a choice that people are making now. So it really comes down to legislation. Like, literally, the companies are never going to give up their data monopoly because it's a great business model. So legislators, we would have to decide, do we force companies like Facebook to open up their data to everybody? And that creates a whole new set of problems. Because then it's not, we still have the issue is there can be third-party companies like Cambridge Analytica wasn't Facebook that actually exploit the data. So even if data, and there's a lot of data that's open sourced out there, there are different, we need to think about how that data is used. And that's a very hard thing to legislate. Really hard. Go ahead.
So I actually think I spent quite a few years to try to think through this problem in terms of individual data ownership. I think the reason it's hard to legislate is because it's not something that legislators can decide.
Yes.
So the woman behind GDPR is, and European Parliament is a good friend. And when she was working on GDPR, the earlier draft, I had a long debate with her because I think it's in one hand, we do need regulators and legislators to set a floor. What is the bottom, not acceptable? But at the same time, I also don't want some regulators to tell me what is private, right? My privacy is very nuanced. Privacy is different between, different people. And privacy is different on the same person and different period of your life, right? When I was in college, I probably care about certain things. And now I'm a professional, I'm a mother, I care about other things. And in future, when I retire, I'll care about different things. So how could the legislator come up with a policy reflect such complex and dynamic nuance of each individual's need? So I think legislators should set a floor. However, the power should come back to individual. So there's a real chance out there. There are a couple companies in Germany actually using blockchain to allow individual data trading. So they set this marketplace and use pricing, individuals' pricing power to reflect your needs to protect your privacy. So I always make this point because on the surface, when we, our friends from, the West or from more developing country always say privacy is the most important thing. But for my country, for example, in China, there are a lot of SME, small business owners. It's very hard for them to get small loans, right? 500, 1,000 US dollar worth of loan. So for them, it's much easier to use their behavior data to guarantee, and they get the loan very quickly, rather than, I protect my privacy because some European Parliament members or some Western, culture think privacy is the most important. They need different needs, right? So who are we here to judge? So I do think that legislators can set a floor, but most importantly, in a healthy data economy, individual not only should just have control of their data, but also have the pricing power.
Right. But I want to say something here. So I think privacy is important too. And if a company comes to me and says, I want to use your data, I'll pay you this much money for your data. I may say, okay, I'll give up my privacy, I'll let you use my data. But the problem is people won't understand exactly what that means. It's very hard to know how that data will actually impact my life personally, and it may not impact me directly, because that data that they just bought from me may impact me on a societal level. So we saw in America, our elections were influenced by using data to target specific people about their likes and dislikes, and then manipulate them into voting a certain way through ads that were very manipulative. So, wow, this doesn't affect me personally, but it does because it changes the outcome of elections, which do. And it goes even deeper than this, because this is why it's so complex. Right now, they are actually using, there are companies out there that are making AI that judges can use to determine whether somebody who's committed a crime gets parole. So they're looking back at big data, like all people with similar patterns. Do they commit a crime again? Recidivism. Are they a danger to society if we let them out now? This AI is literally informing judges to say yes or no, you should get parole. Now think about that. That's our AI saying they're keeping people in prison that might otherwise get out. Is this a good or bad thing for society? The really important thing here is maybe the AI does a better job than people do, because we aren't that good at that. But also, we need to remember that data can be biased. Like, data inherently contains biases. So it could be looking at all these patterns of people who commit crimes and judging. It could reflect actually their skin color, their economic background, the things they've done in the past, where that individual might not commit the crime, but the AI thinks it will. And this is, when we talk about data and data privacy, this is just one of a million examples of how it's going to impact people in their lives.
Right, yeah. Well, actually, you guys raised really $1 million questions. Right? So, of course, data flow, privacy is also one of my favorite topics. But perhaps if we wanted to do that, we have to do really endless discussion tonight. Right? So, given the limited time, so let's move on to the next question. We have a little bit of a coffee break after that. So perhaps some of you guys have more questions to our distinguished speakers about privacy, and then they'll be happy to answer. So perhaps it would be kind of a last question. Well, okay, so actually both of you guys really shocked the audience today with the really mind-boggling, the ideas and the really cutting-edge technology, really out-of-box thoughts. Some little bit of optimistic. Of course, we talked about some kind of concerns about data, the monopoly, but there must be also some kind of negative side effect, right? So, for example, well, actually, the next session will touch upon digital gap or digital inclusion, right? So, some people would think that all those advancements that you guys mentioned even make existing digital gap even further. Right? So on one side of the wall, people already start to talk about like standardization on the metaverse or something. But on the other side, even the connectivity doesn't allow for any kind of a metaverse type, services. So there is still a big gap. And then quite a lot of people are really worried that even this kind of advancement will make the digital gap bigger. So could you guys tell us about any kind of serious digital gap related challenge that you think should be tackled as soon as possible, or any good example of reducing digital gap? So maybe we can start with, perhaps, Jennifer, you can start, please. Yeah. Happy to.
Okay. I think so this reminds me, A.C. Grayling, he's a very brilliant author. He wrote a book last year called The Frontier of Knowledge. And in the book, he talks about human beings constantly, making progress, right? Human beings are quite clever, as evidenced by from bow and arrow to guided missiles, but not wiser, as evidenced by bow and arrow to guided missiles. So I do think that you mentioned a little bit of optimism, right? I think my hope is that we actually have the agency to use technology wisely and create more positive outcome. We don't always get it right, but the value-based leadership with the startup is extremely important for our society and for me personally, and it's one of the metrics when we look at companies. I do think on the hopeful note, what technology is transforming people's lives, for example, in Africa, using digital identity, using health data. Our projects are directly involved in, this digital health capabilities to people in Africa who don't have access to doctors and hospitals easily, and completely transforming their life, right? And we're not using really fancy AI and just very basic data infrastructure, and will allow them to access that. And I also feel very hopeful in terms of how many companies now actually start to leverage Web3 capabilities to bring more equitable type of data infrastructure, more secure data infrastructure, to disrupt some of the companies. They still claim to be tech companies, but they're actually 10, 20 years old, and from the first generation of digital economy. So we probably will see the disruption from this new generation of startups disrupting, large, big tech companies, and create much more equitable kind of model, right? And closing some of those data ownership gaps. But all the technologies, technology itself is not really neutral. When you create some capability, by default, there will be some leaning in terms of what could be used. However, human can be also leaning as well. We are the principal. The principal, how do we adopt the technology, can decide, as I gave an example in terms of disrupting atom between nuclear bomb and nuclear plant, right? Disrupting bytes between, very powerful technology, internet, bring information democratization to Cambridge Analytica. So I think, in future, biotech is the same as well. So I think, the power of forum like this is to distill that kind of idea for startups and very early on, and really use the same tool, but you can actually make very positive impact.
Great. Understood.
Yeah. So I agree with everything.
Yeah.
I also think in the future, as a matter of policy and society, what we need to do is focus more on democratizing access to the tools, the artificial intelligences, the data, to all people. Now, what we've seen is the internet is amazing. Because if you're smart and you have access to the internet, you don't need to go to Harvard or MIT. You can literally teach yourself everything you need to know. Like all these courses from MIT are online. You can actually go there and you can educate yourself. What we need to do if we're going to not have a huge gap between the digital divide is we need to get more advanced tools into the hands of more people, because education is a great example. Like literally how we teach people in schools today, I'm sure you know, it's back from the Industrial Revolution. Literally, our classes are structured in the same way they were a couple hundred years ago, and they aren't really how we naturally learn. They're designed in a factory method. You know, one-to-many, everybody's processed, every student is treated the same. With computers, we can actually, at a very low cost, individualize education to each person and allow them to explore what they're most interested in and learn through actual creating and projects. This is the way we can literally get billions of people around the world if they have the right internet access, and we put out these programs in an open source way, we have the ability to change.
All right, great. Thank you very much for your answers, and I'd really, really love to keep our discussion maybe all night long, drinking with some soju or whatever. But given really, really limited time, so we have to finish here now. So thank you very much for all your contribution answers. And then 큰 박수로 지금까지 수고해 주신 우리 연사분들.
Please give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much. Now we are going to take a short break. We have coffee prepared at the lobby. So at 3:05, in 10 minutes, we are going to resume. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.